This time of the morning. It was a bit earlier when we started. I had to call out about 4:30 this morning. When they asked me to come and do a demo, they kind of left it fairly open, and so obviously today we're going to be looking at the subject of junipers, and the particular juniper we're looking at is Sabina, just because, you know, this is really the tree I wanted to bring and work for you. But rather than just bring a tree and wire it and style it and you'll be really impressed and go away and not actually have really grasped anything, I thought that it would be more useful to kind of talk you through some of the process and the steps that allow us to do, you know, this type of work. I think there's a fashion in bonsai these days for demonstrators particularly to bring in something that looks absolutely impossible to create bonsai out of, and by the end of the day you see something that looks like a bonsai and it looks absolutely amazing, and you know, for the work that some people do, the transformation is almost unbelievable. But for most of us, I think that we don't really do that type of work, and from my point of view, I suppose as what you might call a professional nurseryman, that's not the way that we really work towards creating bonsai trees. Any of you who've worked with bonsai for any period of time will know that bonsai is a progressive thing, and you take steps and trees progressively improve. And I suppose nobody's more guilty than me than sort of supporting the idea that you can transform a tree in 10 minutes, since we do a lot of 10-minute YouTube videos. But what I've always tried to explain is the fact that there's a lot of preparation that goes into bringing a tree to the stage that we can do that work and make that transformation. And of course we don't do it in 10 minutes because it takes a long time to do, but the wonders of editing and so on and so forth, you can condense these things down. But there's a lot that goes into the preparation of material, and there's a lot that goes into the aftercare. And so many people, I think, have got the idea that in order to create bonsai from raw material, particularly evergreens, we wire the tree, we carve it, we style it, and we put it in a pot, and that's it. But there is so much more to it, I think, than that. And so what I wanted to do really was just lay some sort of groundwork out for you before we get going on this, so that you can understand how we can arrive at this point, and then when we're finished getting this all whipped into shape, I'll then explain where we go on from there. But whenever you're trying to create bonsai, whether it's evergreens or deciduous trees, is no different. If you're working with raw material, there are a series of steps that you have to go through to turn that tree into bonsai. Generally, if you're working with collected material, chances are the main thing you've got is a trunk. The main reason for collecting trees is to collect a nice, interesting trunk. Now, the trees we've got here as examples today are all collected junipers, and you know, that's very much a characteristic of these trees, that they do have some really interesting, gnarly, twisty trunks, but not a one of them is even close to being bonsai. Because before we can take a tree, a wild collected tree of any description, whether it comes from mountains, woodlands or your own backyard, the first thing we have to do is to build strength, vigour, energy in that tree, and to build a root system. Because much like a car without an engine, a tree without a root system is not much use. And depending on the type of tree we have, determines how long potentially it will take to build a root system. So if you dig up something like an elm or a privet, that type of tree, you could expect that tree realistically to fill a pot with roots within a year. So potentially after 1 year or maybe 2 years, it's feasible that we can get in and start to work the roots, reduce the size of the pot, and so on and so forth. With other trees, like these junipers, they take 3 to 5 years to build a pot full of root because they grow much more slowly. With other collected trees, like you may be familiar with, say, Mugo pines, they can take 30 years to fill a pot full of root. They just take a very, very long time. And so until you've got that pot full of root, it's very, very difficult to determine that you're going to start working on the tree. I mean, if we take as an example that one, and if you compare that, the foliage density and the colour of the foliage on that compared to this, they look like two completely different animals. But as it turns out, they're both from the same hillside. It's just that this one's had a little more TLC and a little longer in the pot to establish itself and settle itself. And you can see this tree is starting to put on extensions, so you've got little points coming on the ends. It's thick, it's dense, it's a really good colour, and that's indicative of a tree that's very healthy. So it would be quite feasible to take this tree and wire it today and make something that would be really impressive, but within the next few months the tree would start to suffer, and there's of course always a small risk that the tree could be lost or significant areas of the tree could die. So I'm not prepared to take that risk. So that's why something like this is not being worked. So you can see this one here, this one is a nice green colour, really strong. These others two are still a little ways off as well. So I think it's always been very much the case with bonsai and with collected trees that something's been in a pot 2 years, therefore it's ready to work. And I don't think that's the case at all. And I have a lot of people, and they buy trees and they want to, you know, I've been in there 2 years, I need to repot. Everything seems to be done by a calendar or a clock, and to me the most important thing in determining when a tree can be worked is written right here. So we need to learn to read what's written here, and also the way the tree is behaving. So if the tree's soil is constantly dry, proves it's taking up the water, there's roots in there, it's working. If the foliage is growing and increasing in density, the colour's good, then we know that this tree is starting to recover and starting to become much more strong. And until that point, you can't really make any more progress. And of course, people will always say with collected trees particularly, well, I've got to repot it because it's got bad soil, it's got field soil in it or whatever else. But very often if you've got a weak tree, repotting it just adds insult to injury, and then you lose the tree or you lose significant portions of the tree. If you've got a tree, particularly Yamadori, that's not got the best soil in it, you need to learn to water properly. And so if it's a tree that likes a lot of water, then that needs to be kept fairly damp. But with trees, particularly things like junipers and pines, they prefer generally to be drier. And rather than change the soil because it's always too wet, what you need to do is put less water in the pot. It's really, really simple, but so many trees, and particularly Yamadori trees I see, are killed because people are so concerned about the poor quality of the soil they're in, they change it for a good quality soil and sacrifice the tree in doing so. It's not feasible to have trees in free draining soil forever. There comes a point when trees become very mature that we no longer want that free draining soil. Free draining soil promotes strong, rampant growth, which particularly with raw material, and especially with deciduous trees where you're trying to build branch structure, free draining soil, rampant growth is very useful. But the last thing you want on old Yamadori trees with already nice compact foliage is rampant growth, because then you start to get growth on the ends and the smaller stuff on the inner parts of the tree starts to die off, and then it all ends up quite long and leggy. So we're very much trying to promote balance in our collected materials. So learning to water and only watering appropriate to the soil the tree is in will help us to get a tree very strong, very healthy, irrespective of what type of soil it's in. We have Scots pines at home and they're in horrible sticky clay, and you can sort of take it and you know you can kind of you'll stick to your finger. It's that horrible and wet and sticky, but you control the watering of that soil, and then the trees grow just as though they were in a very open, free draining soil mix. So it's really important to bear that in mind. Once the tree becomes strong and it becomes healthy and it's built a significant root system, then there's no reason not to start to look at repotting, changing the soil and so on and so forth. But in general, in my experience, most people repot bonsai way too often. People are repotting every 1 year, every 2 years, every 3 years. I've got trees at home that have been in pots. Well, I've got one in particular that's been in the same pot for 18 years. And it grows profusely, it's strong, it's a good colour. A lot of our trees sit in the same pot for 10 years. There's no reason to change the soil. The drainage has gone on the soil, but that doesn't matter because of the way you water. But I mean, I had an old Japanese pine arrive on the nursery about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and so that probably hasn't been repotted in 20 years, and it's absolutely rock solid. But the tree is as healthy as anything, so when we water that tree, we go back 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Just keep going back and going back and going back until you're comfortable that it's wet through. But then it may not be watered for a couple of 3 days, depending on the weather and so on and so forth. And that's how you start to deal with perhaps what might be a less than ideal soil. Whereas if we were to take that old tree and take it out of its compacted soil and rake it all out, clean it out, it would probably survive, and we put it into a free draining soil mix, and the next thing you know, it'll start throwing branches, because you've upset the equilibrium. And a quality bonsai sits on a knife edge between being too vigorous and starting to become rampant, and being too weak and starting to die back. And I've seen some very, very beautiful old trees that have been ruined by people throwing them into free draining soil mix and pumping feed into them, and you get long internodes, big leaves, very coarse growth, and a lot of that lovely old fine delicate twigging and ramification is quickly lost, where you've got huge shoots coming out of the trunk, and like strong areas becoming stronger and weak areas becoming progressively weaker. So before we start to look at the process of styling and working with Yamadori, it's important to be 100% sure that our tree is entirely healthy, because there's absolutely no point in me coming in here and doing a job for you and just like, you know, impressing everybody's socks off with my styling prowess, and you never see the tree again. You know, because it's, you know, it's in the compost heap at home, and unfortunately there's an awful lot of trees and a lot of demonstrators past that are in that situation. Well, you know, I mean, you're going to make an omelette, you've got to break some eggs, but you know, it's not a good idea to go around killing trees. And for sure, when you start, you're going to kill 1 or 2. That's the price of an education. But there comes a point when you start to get a quality of material, you don't want to kill it anymore. And I don't, you know, I mean, most of us do bonsai because we love trees, I think, first and foremost. And, you know, we love trees, we love the whole concept of trees, we love being around them, we love the changes and everything. But it's really, really sad when something dies. And it happens to all of us. But the more we can do to reduce the frequency of those types of things happening, the better. And, you know, I'm of a belief that success breeds success. So you start off and you start with something small, something straightforward and easy, and then when you've got that under your belt, then you do another one and another one and another one, and progressively your skills improve, your trees stop dying, you stop snapping branches when you bend them, you stop losing trees, and your trees get better and better, and your skills get better, and then you feel more confident at taking on more complex material. So bonsai is a progressive thing in that sense, but we've got to start somewhere, and for me the most important thing is to start with a healthy tree and to understand the horticulture behind all the artistic shenanigans that goes on. And so I would rather see a badly shaped tree that was healthy than a perfectly shaped tree that wasn't healthy. On the rare occasions that I do these types of demos these days, I won't just turn up and work your material, because people tend to give you stuff that's not ready. And also, you know, I mean, very often you see trees come in and the foliage is out here and it's all twisted up and coiled up and made to look good. And that's bonsai for entertainment purposes. It's not bonsai in terms of the technique of how we create bonsai on an ongoing basis. If you have a tree that's very long and the foliage is a long way out, you've got no choice but to work on that tree for a period of time until the foliage becomes compact. I've got a big Scots pine that sits at home on the end of one of our benches, and it sits about this high, and when it came originally the foliage dusted on the floor, because as the wind blew it used to sort of sweep all the dust off the floor. And now that foliage has gone from there to sitting on top of the tree here. That's taken me somewhere between 8 and 9 years, I would guess. And everybody who comes says, you need to style this tree, you need to style this tree, because it's all, the foliage all tight on top, and you know, but I just love it as it stands, to be honest. And we just got 1 or 2 of that type of tree that are very, very similar. Now I've seen people use those for demonstrations when the foliage is this far out. And the thing is, it makes something look like bonsai. Because if you take that long foliage and you wire it, you can pull it all in, and you know, you can coil it up like this and you can compact it all, and it'll look really good. But the minute you take the wire off, it reverts back to what it was. So to me, if it's if it's only reliant on the, or if it's reliant on the wire for the style and the shape of it, it's not bonsai. And so many trees you see, even at a very top level, they're amazing pieces of material, but what we would call the bonsai element of it is created with wire. You take away the wire, there's no bonsai. And for sure you can't have a bonsai exhibition with trees that aren't wired, because there's not enough trees out there. You know, we're too new at this to have that number of trees. So I'm not against having trees that are wired on exhibition, that's not what I'm saying. But if the tree is not ready to be wired, because the foliage is too long, you need to employ your horticultural skill and a little bit of patience to develop those trees further before you do your first wiring. So if we take a tree like this, unfortunately it's virtually impossible to produce bonsai from junipers and most evergreens in reality without some wiring. So if you're somebody that doesn't like wiring, there's probably not the best place for you to be. Because ultimately it's very, very difficult and too time consuming, because they're too slow growing, to produce quality branch structure in evergreens by pruning alone. So we're going to need to use some wire. But with a tree like this, and with the strength that's in this tree, the vigour that's in it, the quality of the branch structure we've got underneath and the density of the foliage, most of it won't have to be pulled in. Most of it is pulled out. And as you know, if you know anything about bonsai, anything about trees, they always reach out to the light. So if the structure of a tree is pulled in, that's entirely unnatural. Whereas if it comes out, that's absolutely natural and as it should be. So what we want to do is have something that's compact so that we can create a branch structure that's has a very natural appearance. In other words, it's reaching out to the light with the foliage on the ends. And so if we have a tree at this stage with the level of branch structure we've got here, the thickness of branches, the density of the foliage and the shortness of it, this will be wired. We'll get this all placed, and that wire will stay on between 1 and 3 years typically, and we'll take the wire off and the tree will maintain that shape. We don't have to wire this tree year after year after year after year. I know people who have wired the same tree 10, 15, 20 times. That is just such a soul destroying thing to have to face. I remember going up to the northeast years ago, and a guy there had a big garden juniper, and it had a trunk like this, and everything up there was big, I don't know, and a big cascade pot, and it came from here right the way down to the ground. And he fine wired every little piece of this tree. I mean, it had a crown like this. And I explained to him the horticulture and the pruning techniques and so on and so forth of how to grow that tree. And he realised very quickly that he wouldn't have to wire it year after year after year, because he'd wired it 3 times already. And so there is a point where the wire is important. It's an important tool to have in our arsenal in bonsai, and it's something that we can use to our advantage. But so many people are reliant on wiring almost entirely to produce good-looking trees, and that's just not necessary. If we couple the wiring technique we're using, the different shaping techniques we can employ, and good quality horticulture with already good quality material, we can produce really, really impressive trees without relentless reliance on wiring. So generally we've done quite a lot of these, and they get one significant wiring, and then subsequently that wire has been removed, and so you're maybe wiring 5–10% of the tree for the second time, and that works with yews as well. I've got yews at home that are nicely shaped, and they've only ever been wired twice. Pines, generally Scots pines in particular, can be shaped really quite significantly with no more than one major wiring and then one minor refinement wiring. But again, it's a combination of using the horticultural techniques and skills that we have with wiring and pruning and so on and so forth. And if we can sort of take that in the round, as it were, and master all those different elements, then there's no reason at all why we can't produce very good quality bonsai from admittedly good quality material within 3, 4, 5 years. Now that's within the reach of most of us. I know none of us getting any younger, but you know, 3, 4, 5 years is reasonable. Whereas if you're looking at something that's 10, 20, 30 years out, nobody's really got, you know, It don't take that long to raise your kids, does it? You know, and nobody really, I think, would have the passion to be able to take bonsai and think, yeah, this will look nice in 30 years. You'll be a strange individual if you're prepared to commit that long to something. But so, like I say, balancing all these different elements is important. Another thing that's significant, not so much on evergreens, but particularly more on deciduous trees, is the way that we build a tree. In as much as we've already talked about the roots, but you want to build a branch structure, so you can't really build refinement until you've built primary branch structure. Now, any bonsai has levels of branching, so you've got primary branches, which are the thicker part of the branch, secondary branches where it forks, you've got tertiary branches where it forks again, and then the ramification on the end of that. So if all you've got is one shoot with ramification on the end, you're missing these stages, and these stages are what determine the quality of a bonsai tree in relation to its branch structure. So we're all in a hurry to have something that looks nice, and so you grow and then you prune, and you just keep pruning, and you've got something that looks like a nice tree, but you haven't got the quality of branch structure. And also it's important not so much on this type of Yamadori, it's because of the shapes and things, but in more formal styles of tree, you're looking for building branches of the right thickness. Now, you can't really begin refinement techniques until you've done or gone through the process of developing the primary branch structure. So you can't thicken a branch and build ramification on it at the same time. So if you want to thicken a branch, you've got to grow it. The beauty of these trees is they already come with all this gorgeous branch structure underneath, which we can use to our advantage. So with these, we're kind of circumventing a lot of that painful, time-consuming growing process, because really all of these trees have the trunk, they have the primary branching, they have the secondary branching, and some of them even have third stage branching, which we can begin to incorporate. And so once we've got that primary branch structure laid in place, they start to take shape quite nicely. I mean, you can see on this, let's get what you can see here, you've got a branch, and you can see it's already got this nice little flat element of foliage sitting on top. So these are already, and with this sort of small ramification underneath. So we're building this sort of branch structure, so with the foliage over the top. To me, a quality bonsai is not just a case of something that looks like a tree. It has to have all the elements. So we're looking for an interesting trunk, we're looking for good primary, secondary branch structure, the foliage density on the ends, all these different elements combined together to make a good quality bonsai tree. And you can't really skip one phase until you've completed, you can't skip one and get to the next one until you've finished the last one. So you're building progressively. Has anybody got any questions so far? I won't stop for breath if you let me. Unfortunately, I'm told we can't be using power tools today, so I had thought about moving that outside, but then they said it was going to rain. So unfortunately with this tree it's not too complex in that respect, so we'll have a little pick and a scratch and clean some of this up. The beauty of these junipers is they naturally make live veins, live vein being a part of the tree that remains alive and feeds the top, and then parts where they die off turns into dead wood naturally. So actually none of these have been touched in anyway. So here you've got these dead areas, live parts underneath, and it's a very natural part of the way these trees grow. These are collected in the Pyrenees, and where they grow in a carpet, and typically that carpet's about that deep. As you can see, they're all more or less the same height. So the trunks tend to grow in the shade underneath, and all the foliage knits together. And you know, from a distance, it just looks like a grassy hillside. But underneath it all are all these amazing trunks. Now, a lot of them are ground layers. So a branch grows long, and the snow in the winter pushes it through, and it hits the soil, and then it roots, and then it grows. So something like this one, you can see here, there's the end. So this one obviously was a ground layer, so off this part here was another branch that's come down, hit the ground and grown, and then it's turned into a self-contained tree. So I think most of these are probably grown in that way. And very often you find a little tiny piece coming in and then a big piece coming off, because where it hits the ground and it starts to root, and obviously it swells and thickens from there. And because it tends to climb on top of itself, anything that's shaded out underneath tends to die off. So very often you get all these little dead snags and things sort of naturally, and they're just branches that have not been in the light and so have naturally died back. So where we've got one or two cuts, like on here, there was one removed from here and there's another one, this part here. These bits are natural, so obviously we just want to work those so they look very similar. The one thing I really can't do with this today for you is clean up and define the live veins and the dead parts. And it's a fascinating process with these, as sort of getting a knife and a little wire brush and picking and scratching through it and finding what's alive and what's dead. Because junipers are very prone to making live veins. So the sap tends to flow in a very linear fashion. So this piece here feeds this piece here. So it's always a good idea to get the trunks clean so you can see what's what, because it'd be very easy to assume that this root over here is not feeding anything and cut that off, and then all of a sudden something completely other, and then another area of the tree dies off, because very often the live veins can be really long and contorted and go a really long way and then actually only feed one small amount of foliage. So generally it's very helpful to be able to get through these, clean these all up, and then you can see what it is that you're working with. I think a lot of people have real issues with styling trees. I mean, we have quite a lot of these types of trees, Yamadori trees in general, and they're really hard to sell. As soon as they're worked, they get sold. But as raw material, as we would call them, they tend to be almost impossible to give away. And I think that's because very often they perhaps don't look very promising, or just the fact that a lot of people don't really know what to do with them. You know? I always wanted good quality Yamadori. Back when I had all the skip rats and stumps, I wanted really good quality Yamadori and didn't have access to it and couldn't have afforded it even if I had. And so I learned to deal with all my stumps and all those sort of things. I learned to work with those. And then when eventually the time came and I did start to get some better quality trees, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. It actually can be really complicated and really difficult. And generally the better quality the material, the more difficult it is to work with, for the simple reason that it's got so many more options. You know, when you had a stump, generally it had a reasonable front where the best nabari was, or there was some dead wood or something you could carve. So you really only had what would be called a primary feature. So there was only one really good bit worth looking at. Whereas when the Yamadori gets to be really good quality, there's so many different aspects and elements to it, and they can be turned in so many different angles and so many different directions. And all of a sudden the whole thing becomes much more difficult and much more complex because you've got so many more options. So generally when styling a tree, the most important thing is what Dan Robinson termed focal point bonsai. So there's a point of focus on any piece of material, which is its most endearing characteristic. You know, it could be a hollow in the front, it could be a twist, it could be a certain movement of live vein. There are lots of different things that happen with trees that make for very interesting features, and potentially those features are something that we want to show. And so most people tend to style their trees. They scratch around in the soil, find the best base or the best nabari, and then that has to be the front, irrespective of what happens with the rest of the tree. And I think that doesn't really work with Yamadori, because Yamadori is not like, say, Japanese material, where you've had a tree that's specifically grown for bonsai. You've got this really good nabari, branches in the right place and so on and so forth. These things are completely free form. They are what they are, and what you've got to do in terms of creating attractive bonsai is to work with what you've got. And I think one of the most significant elements of Yamadori, and something I struggle with for years, is learning how to work with what you've got, because there are things you can change and there are things that you can't change, and the secret is to know the difference. I killed a lot of good trees trying to change things that couldn't be changed, folding and bending huge trunks and all sorts of things, and had nothing but trouble and problems. And later on I learned that, to me, the art of bonsai, the art of Yamadori bonsai is compromise. You will never find, or very rarely, the perfect trunk angle, the perfect base, the best focal point, the best first branch, apex coming towards you. You will never really find all of those things. You invariably find the best nabara is on the opposite side to the most interesting part of the tree. So you've got to look at all the different elements you've got and distill out of those the best that you can get, and stop worrying about the things that don't quite conform to what you think bonsai should be, and just allow the tree to express itself and go with its own magic and unique characteristics. And I think that takes some experience and time and confidence to learn to be able to do that. And also, you've got to have the courage of your own convictions to do these things, because no matter how you style one of these trees, somebody's going to have an opinion on it, and they're probably not going to like it, and that doesn't matter, because ultimately in bonsai you need to do your own trees for yourself. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, you know. Years ago, I used to have a guy who used to come regularly to the garden. He used to come for a couple of days and do workshops, and he was involved in a club, and once a year that club did a styling by committee evening, and they picked some unfortunate, typically juniper, and everybody would all sit around and put in their 2 penneth.
Oh, yeah.
And so a couple of 3 guys would be up the front doing what they were kind of what everybody generally considered was the best way to go, and they ended up with, realistically, 1 of 3 things. And at the end they raffled the tree. This guy always seemed to win these trees, and then they used to come to me to try and sort them out. So the 3 lowest common denominators are a semi-cascade, so you've got some material that's got a long low branch, and so that always has to go over the side of the pot. The other one was a windswept, because we didn't have enough branches on one side, or you know, so then there had to be a windswept. And then the last one was always a literati, because we kept cutting until we couldn't decide what to do, and then we had a bit on top. So so that tends to be the way. But that's, you know, when you take the common consensus, I think it takes out the possibility of creativity, because all of us have. Somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, I was at a club, and they said, did I think that anybody could do this, you know, styling and so on and so forth? And I said, yes, I believe they can. There are a few people out there that have a little bit of extra skill, a little bit of insight, and if you like, it can sprinkle a little fairy dust on the top of it and can do something really a cut above. But most people don't do it, and that's why they can't do it, you know. Now, you shouldn't go out and buy yourself a tree that's £1,000 or £2,000 and expect to take that home and make a masterpiece out of it. But you don't start there. You know, you go to a garden centre and you buy yourself a pine for 30 quid, and you take it home and you prune it all out, and you shape it, and then you decide you didn't do a very good job. And you don't give up there and go, well, I can't do it. You go and get another one, and you just keep going and going and going and going. And then when you get to be somebody like Kevin Wilson, who's styled 10,000 trees, he can style most about anything, you know. I'm fairly convinced you could give him a doormat and a broom and he could make something really significant out of it. You know, his skill and ability as a bonsai designer, I believe, is second to none. But at one point, he was doing 6 or 8 trees a day for years on end. You know, I remember we were in Scotland and I was driving him home, and I said, how do you just take a piece of raw material and just bang, it just seems to be there as easy as that. Some wire, and there it is. And when he started, he was selling trees, bonsai at car boots, and he said, well, I'd go to a nursery and buy 1,000 larch trees and wire every one, and put them in pots and clip them over and so on and so forth. That's how you learn. You don't learn by doing one and then failing and then not doing another one. You learn by constantly falling over and getting up. You know? Was it Peter Adams said Peter went to his workshop because he killed more trees than anybody else. And you know, to a degree it's true, because you learn from your mistakes. You know, we lose things, it happens. You know, I make mistakes, I break things off, I do daft things, and that's the price of an education. And sometimes that price is money, you know, but you know, education's not cheap, is it? If you've got kids at university, you know full well it ain't cheap. But we learn not by hearing, we learn by doing. So the significant thing is, like today, if you pick something up, go home and do it. Go home. If you learn one thing today, go home and do that one thing, because then it'll get under your skin, it'll get into your head where you won't be able to get rid of it. And if every time you come to something like this, you go away with one new element or one new fact that you can add to your repertoire, before you know it, you'll be up here doing this. Saved me a really long drive. And that's it, it just builds one thing on another, on another, on another. And to me, that's life. And bonsai is the same. We build one thing on another, on another. We build roots, we build strength, we build vigor, we build foliage density, we build branch structure, and so it goes. And you can't do one thing without the other. And you'll never be any good at styling trees, funnily enough, until you style trees. And so few people do it. And like I said, I'm not suggesting that everybody goes out and buys really expensive trees, but you know, there's reasonable stuff out there for 20, 30 quid, you know, and realistically, what's that? I mean, it's, you know, it's the price of beer at a takeaway, isn't it? You know, and what you got for that? You know, a waistline like mine, if you're not careful. So realistically, you know, we can all learn to do these things, and who knows where it will end. I mean, I had to learn, I guess, because I couldn't afford to pay anybody else. Couldn't afford workshops or anything else, couldn't afford to buy bonsai, was absolutely as poor as a church mouse without a church when I started, and you know, we just had to work with whatever I had, and creativity will find a way out no matter what, you know, and if you've got within you to do it. But like I say, a lot of people just get a degree of understanding, knowledge about bonsai, and then they start to become really afraid of what if, but you know, life's full of what ifs, isn't it, you know, and you just have to get up every morning and go out and live your life regardless. And I think with bonsai, to me, the greatest thing in bonsai is achieving what it was you set out to do. And I think that's, you know, no matter what we do in our lives, I think for me, you know, that's the important thing, that we set a goal, we set to want to achieve something, and we work towards it, and it doesn't come overnight, you know, but it takes time and effort and work, and you progress on step by step by step. So like I say, hopefully that's given you some background to the preparation that we have to go through to get to this stage. So what I think we're going to do, we'll move these around, and there's still some wiring on here to do, so the guys will start on that, and I'll start cleaning this dead wood up. You can come up and have a look, and you know, if you stand there too long, we'll find you something to do. And so like I say, we'll just get on and work this, and then I think maybe after lunch we can come back, and then we'll sort of walk you through the rest of it, because what I'd like to do is talk you through the elements of the design of a tree, of what goes where and how. And I think that those are really simple things that we can cover, and because you know, I can place this and I kind of know what I want to do with it, and you won't necessarily know why. So what I'd like to do is explain to you why and how and wherefore, and then perhaps it'll make a little bit more sense. So yeah, if that's okay.
Yes. How long since that one was collected? How long has it taken to get it like that?
That's been in our garden now for 2 growing seasons, and it would have been 2 before that, so 4 years. Yeah. They turn around quite quickly, you know. We've had some junipers and they just sit and look at you, and they're just awful things. But the amazing thing about these is, as much as there's millions of them out there, and they grow in carpets, there's never 2 exactly the same. They're all quite variable. And I try and pick the ones that have got the nicest foliage, where some of them are more open, some of them have a tendency towards more juvenile foliage. The significant thing with this is that we're not going to really remove any green. I gave this a clean out, because you can see, like this one's not been cleaned out. You can see it's a bit dense, it's a bit scruffy, there's a lot of, if you look at it closely when you come up you'll see, whereas this one's more clean underneath. So the only real foliage that's been removed here is the very weak stuff. So when we work junipers, the important thing is that we take the very weak foliage away, and then when we've placed it, we're going to take the very strong foliage away and keep the bit in between. And we're going to keep a lot of it. So the foliage that's been taken off this so far, I would say you could squeeze that into an egg cup. So very, very little. So my general rule, I mean, apart from say cutting a whole branch off, in terms of working what we've got here, my general rule would be we will never remove more than about 10 to 15% of the foliage at any one time, because if you do, it just stresses the foliage. It just stresses the tree as a whole. And since we've spent quite a bit of time building up the strength, the vigour, the energy within the tree, we don't want to knock it back. Because I've found that most people spend a significant amount of time taking a tree forward and then knock it right back and then have to wait for it to come forwards again. So we've worked enough of these now to know that with this work that we'll hopefully complete today if I show up, this tree will do nothing but go forwards. So if you see this tree in say September, it'll just look better. And if you see it next September, it'll look better. It will never, hopefully, go backwards and then have to come forwards again. But with workshops and demos, most people are not happy unless there's more on the floor than there is on the tree. Whatever you put on the floor, you're going to have to grow back, you know. I mean, like I say, with the exception, I mean, obviously there was a branch removed from here, we didn't need it. But, you know, to me, bonsai is what's on the end of the trunk, not laying on the floor. And the growing season in this country is unpredictable at best and relatively short. And it's quite difficult to achieve much. And so I've seen people spend several years growing foliage and then strip it all out for a workshop and then have to grow it all back. Well, why do that? Especially with junipers, particularly because they keep their foliage for several years before it becomes old and drops. So we want to keep as much as we can, because at the end of the day there's only one place that the health of this tree is coming from, and that's the sun. So if we start stripping its solar panels out, it's not going to be able to recharge itself, is it? So to me, that's why this is so important. There's a sense that the strength of a tree comes from the root system and from the roots, but all the roots do is help to support the photosynthesis in the foliage, and it's the photosynthesis in the foliage that creates the vigour and energy of a tree. And that's why I say something like this, it's still building a root system, but at the same time, it's still building its foliage density. Once they reach this type of density, vigour, and colour, they create energy so much faster than they will in this. So you get this exponential increase in the vigour, energy, strength and dynamism of the tree, which you don't get at this stage. This stage is very weak, so it's very slow and it takes time to build. And that time is just something that you just leave alone, just let it happen. But with a tree like this, what I don't want to do is work this, and then by the end of the summer be looking at something that looks like this. You know, that would be really entirely counterproductive, and you know, for me would be a waste of a day really. So okay, so we'll start work on this. Like I say, I'm going to clean up these little dead parts and deal with some of these as best we can, and the guys will do some get some of the wiring finished. So if you have any questions, come up and ask and have a look and do what we can. So we can chuck this one on the end.
Wood like that,
Yeah.
which wasn't particularly well shaped, but he put the blowtorch on it until it started to steam, and then you can wire it and twist it, and then it'll hold that shape.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
What do you know how far to take the wire up to? Do you just take it up to this year's growth, or?
Up to the green, basically. So you just come up to, you know, where it's spaced like that.
What time of the year would you repot that? Sort of when you think the sap is rising? Or?
No, typically this time of year. I mean, they repot. We've done a lot in sort of June, July time. Also in the autumn. Generally, yes, yeah, and of course.
I think it's damp as well that's been the problem. You know, I've made the soil as open as I possibly could, but I still think the
cold and wet will kill off the mycelium to a greater degree. And my opinion is, if you want to keep hot, the winter much better, and then in the spring the tree grows much more strongly as a result. Particularly
Graham, you collected this in the Pyrenees. How did you get them in?
I don't collect them, I buy them from somebody that does, who lives there.
Oh, I see. But even then they had to go into quarantine, right? No?
No, there's free movement of plants within the European Union. So. She's an angle go fine, is it? Top one, yeah. Just put another one on. Just have to bend it from here on. Small, cusp it down. Yeah, it works really hard down. Yeah. Quite a tough one. Yeah, it's tough. We generally. I mean, yeah, you've got to pull in the right direction, obviously. So occasionally it's necessary to put one where you don't want to see it. But
I do that too. I use stones and rings.
the other thing about guys is you can just leave that and that'll just stretch, and then you come back a little while later and you can pull it a little further. Whereas if you try and version on YouTube.
Are you taking questions at the moment?
Yeah.
You deliberately let that grow unruly, so to speak, for this purpose, for the demonstration, because you've obviously done quite a lot of work on it, haven't you?
No, completely untouched.
That's what I'm saying, you haven't touched it deliberately
No.
in order to keep it for the
No.
demonstration?
Well, the only thing we did, obviously, we pre-wired some of it and pruned out some of the foliage, some of the weak stuff, but other than that, we haven't done anything at all. This is the first time it's ever been worked. So, but obviously it was allowed to grow because they start off like this,
yeah,
a little thin. Once they bulk up like this, and we can work them. So this is kind of the first time that.
and this is a very, very stupid question. Of all the stuff you've cut off, I know it is stupid. I shouldn't really ask it, but you can't really you could not use that to grow another one.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I don't grow things from cuttings.
No, well, I suppose that's. Could you take a cutting and grow something on from there?
Yeah. Ramon he's really good at taking cuttings of junipers. I think I probably.
So when I saw you cut that big bit off there, you know.
Then put it in some wood foam as well, and then just put a hole in the bark, in the soil, and then put it in, and then push
And it's
on.
regular watering, I imagine, is it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Front here, if we turn that through half a turn, it's almost as wide this way as it is this way. So when we look at that tree, and it's something you get face to face with the tree and not by looking at pictures, you've got depth here. So when you look at a tree, your eye needs to go from the base of the trunk up the tree, and your eye follows the lines of the tree and the branch pads and so on, and the foliage pads and so on and so forth. But it also, your eye also needs to go forward and back. So when we've got a C shape, like we have this trunk here, the best thing to do with that is use that to frame a back branch. So that gives us some real depth and perspective in the tree. So when you look at it, you've got quite a lot of distance between this sort of front element here and this back part. And of course you can see all the way through, and that frames that really nicely. And in time, it's important to build some very nice structure in the back and the woodwork of this branch, because you'll always be able to see it from the front. The other thing that we had an issue with on this tree, you see this straight piece under here, this sort of trunk as it comes up, it would be very easy to set that where that line was absolutely parallel to the soil surface or to the pot ultimately, and that never looks right. So that line either has to go very slightly up or very slightly down. So this inclination with a little turn like this, we can just get this not quite parallel. A parallel line to a pot is always wrong, it never ever looks right. And so by actually utilising this branch, which I wasn't expecting to necessarily even keep, what that's allowed us to do, the trunk comes now round, all the way around and then back up. So it's a nice sort of movement, spiral in motion that actually follows the natural lines that are already in here, and it gives us some good taper throughout the trunk. But by having that bit of extra height here, has taken the pressure of having to pull this down low or change the inclination too far. I've had a look at the roots on this tree, and with these trees, they're unlike, say, deciduous trees where you've usually got a fairly big base or some fairly big roots. So there's a limit to how far you can move them. With these, because the roots tend to be very fine, and they just come out of anywhere where the live vein touches the ground, you've got, not infinite, but incredible flexibility in the planting angle and the inclination forward to back and so on and so forth. But I'm reasonably happy with what I've seen here. So this part was buried in soil, so we've cleaned that out here, and there's further to go under there. So we've got what amounts to not a nabari as such in the conventional sense, but we've got a nice solid root base on there. I think we show this part of the tree with the, you know, these nice live veins and shari and things going on. It's quite interesting.